Hello and welcome back to another AP Sports episode. Today we are joined by Patrick for a little bit of the Battle of LA talk, Clippers and Lakers. We're going to talk about what they were doing in free agency. We're going to talk about, obviously, LeBron, his impact, if his age is going to hurt him. All sorts of questions need to be asked.
Age or age?
It
sounded like you said
Magic is in the organization, but I said age. But that is something to think about. So, do either of you want to kick us off with a big free agent signing like JaMychal Green?
Well, I'd like to start a little bit in the draft just because it happened a little bit before there. So the Lakers didn't have a pick in the draft, so it wasn't very significant. And their only draft pick turned out to be Jaden McDaniels, who was sent to OKC in the Dennis Schroeder trade. So they really didn't do anything in the draft. But, yes, as Archer pointed out, JaMychal Green, that's with the Clippers, not the Lakers. So we'll get to that later.
I was just bringing up a random free agent.
Yeah, no, I think that the Lakers had 5 incredible signings in the offseason. So I guess I'll start with number 5 for me. For number 5, I think the re-signing of KCP was pretty important for not only just as a good role player, but also as a vet. So they signed him on a 3-year, $40 million. And he's actually the longest tenured Laker on their roster, which is pretty cool. So he kind of knows the system and all this stuff. So he'll have a pretty good position on that team. So it was actually unclear for a while if KCP would re-sign with them, but I think that everyone in the Lakers organization benefits from his re-signing. Next, I think that the signing of Wesley Matthews was pretty good from the Bucks. For the Lakers, I think it'll be a pretty important key role to LeBron and AD's offense and both the defensive side as well. They also signed Marc Gasol from the Raptors, which was pretty surprising until they went after him. No one really would consider Marc Gasol to go to the Lakers. People thought he would go to the Clippers or other locations, so that was pretty interesting. They got rid of JaVale McGee's contract, which was good, which is what they wanted to do and what they needed to do to get Marc Gasol. So they traded JaVale and a future second for Jordan Bell and Alfonso McKinzie, which are 2 pretty decent, I wouldn't say good players because we haven't
shaky.
They're pretty bad. But then again, we've only seen their talent. Jordan Bell on both the Warriors. He did do pretty well on the Warriors, and then Cleveland, he did nothing. So both Bell and McKenzie are on non-guaranteed contracts. So the Lakers can waive them without impacting their cap space if they choose to do so.
Yeah.
Or Archer.
Yeah. I was just going to add to the first thing you said, the KCP. I know that was a little bit back, but I think that we need to stress the importance. That was a really big signing because, I mean, it wasn't cheap, first off, so they obviously have some faith in him. But, I mean, he's going to be super important for them in the playoffs. I mean, we saw it recently. He's got the shot. He has what it takes defensively, and in the big moment, he seems to do pretty well. So I think that was probably one of top 3 of their biggest and best moves in this offseason so far.
Yeah, I would say retaining KCP was really big. He was an integral part of their playoff run. I mean, he didn't really mess up, I would say, entirely. I would say KCP doesn't necessarily add that veteran leadership aspect, considering he's been on probation while on the Lakers. I don't know if I'd factor that into his contract at all or him being on this team, but he is a good player. He's a good defender, good three-point shooter. He's basically everything they wanted Draymond Green to be. Not Draymond Green, what they wanted Danny Green to be.
I was very confused for a second.
I know. And then you touched on Wesley Matthews. I think that Wesley Matthews is also a version of what they wanted Danny Green to be. LeBron, of course, kind of has this staple player that a lot of people thinks that he likes to play with, he plays with well. Wesley Matthews and KCP fits that mold. 2 defensive wings, both good at shooting. It's kind of what LeBron has basically won off these last couple seasons. I think that position might be a little overblown and how reliant LeBron is on that sort of position, but it does help. I mean, it always helps to have great 3-point shooters you can pass out to, especially if you're such a big team like the Lakers. And that's one thing I wanted to touch on really fast. So the Lakers lose 2 bigs in JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard, basically for Gasol and Harrell. This could be kind of controversial, but I actually don't really like that move. I think Gasol kind of helps him spread the floor, but I think Gasol's getting a little older. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a bad player. And the Lakers are obviously in win now mode, but I think Gasol at times can be a little heavy-footed where JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard can both get out in transition, which is something the Lakers were really able to capitalize on this last season. The lobs obviously were great, and that's another key loss that we can get into later in Rondo. He was a guy that I thought was really good in the playoffs and just, once again, integral to their success. He's a guy I would have tried to retain. But even Montrezl Harrell, I would argue Dwight Howard's better than. Montrezl Harrell's essentially an energy guy, just like Dwight Howard. But Dwight Howard's a better defender. He's more physical. And even then, it's not like I would say Dwight Howard's going to be playing massive minutes in the playoffs, but he's a guy that's going to make the other opponent's center. Like, they're never going to have an easy bucket. He's incredibly physical. I don't think that Harrell is a very good defensive center, being 6'8". You saw that in the Clippers series. He couldn't really guard Jokic on the perimeter or interior. He's a good energy guy. Like, I appreciate that. Like, he'll come off the bench with a lot of energy. But I think Dwight Howard does that same thing pretty well.
Well,
for the money, that's hard to do. But I would say that's sort of my hot take on their offseason. They obviously made that trade for Schroeder as well. I would say we can leave some of the losses that they had in free agency as well as that trade kind of for this next little discussion. But if you guys have anything to say about that.
Yeah, well, I was just going to add, to counter your point about Montrez, we really didn't see JaVale or Howard really at all at the back end of the finals.
Howard played a lot in that series against the Heat. I don't think JaVale did, but
I don't think JaVale played at all. And I think
against the Heat, but
I think Montrez adds, like you said, some energy and a lot more offensive production. I think 6'8" is easy to say, yeah, center-wise, it's not going to help him. But at the same time, it's not as much of a detriment as I would think, especially if he can continue the offensive production. He's a fantastic offensive player and a great add for the team, just in general for the playoffs. I mean, I didn't see Dwight Howard make too many impact plays, yeah, he was helpful with his defense, but
I thought he was really good defensively. And I think the reason the Lakers were able to make it so far is because they were so great defensively and so physical on the interior. You can't score on Anthony Davis and Dwight. It's just so physical on the interior. It's going to be hard to score. And they had so much length. I feel like Gasol and they were also so good scoring the ball because they were so great in transition. I feel like two of the Lakers' greatest strengths were hurt by those two moves. I feel like the center position was a place where they were going to be better than any other team.
Don't need to hit the table.
Hey.
No, I agree.
I don't think that Gasol and Montrez are necessarily going to be the same sort of lob threat that these guys were. It's hard for me to – the Lakers won last year because they were so great at being big and being physical in the paint. They won that was why they were good.
I mean, they still have Anthony Davis. You can't.
Anthony Davis is great. Don't get me.
I agree with
that's where I was going next. I was going to say Anthony Davis in that finals series. You talk about him playing center a little bit. They still put Dwight in there. I don't think you can have a lineup necessarily with Montrez and Anthony Davis in the playoffs, especially if they play Anthony Davis at the 5, because Montrez doesn't stretch the floor at all, and he's not.
Maybe that's what they were trying to do. Anthony Davis hates the 5.
But I don't understand why you would want Montrez and Anthony Davis.
Anthony Davis would never start at the 5. It'd be Marcus Gasol.
No, it wouldn't.
I don't think Gasol would ever start.
They would put
LeBron,
AD, Marcus Gasol, Wesley Matthews, and KCP.
Marcus Gasol will not be a starter in the playoffs.
I don't think Marcus Gasol will start in the playoffs. Mainly because he hasn't.
Okay, I was talking about the regular season. Sorry.
Marcus Gasol probably start in the regular season last year. We'll talk about Serge a little later on.
The problem with Dwight Howard is he just signed a 3-year, $70 million contract with the Hawks.
No, I understand that. I kind of got interrupted in the middle of that. I was going to say, I understand they can't keep Dwight Howard, but they sacrifice a ton of physicality, which I wish they could have picked up in another guy. And even then, JaVale McGee's length was, honestly, I would be fine with them retaining him too, because it's not like he had a massive impact in the playoffs. I feel like they could have gotten the smaller deal for him. I know he was kind of on a big deal coming in, but if they could have restructured it somehow for him to stay on that championship level team. It's just hard for me to say, wow, that's an incredible move when they lose two of their greatest strengths. I would say overall with the Lakers, I do think that they really, as much as negative as I've been, they won the finals last year. They're likely to win the finals again. I mean, we haven't even talked about Schroeder, who they picked up, and their losses and Danny Green. I mean, Danny Green arguably didn't help, and they basically upgraded Danny Green's position with Wesley Matthews.
They also lost Avery Bradley as well, but that's not.
Avery Bradley wasn't even there in the playoffs, and they won the finals. So I don't even think that he's necessarily a guy I would bring up. But
and I think their trade for Dennis Schroeder was
a great trade. Do we want to move on to that?
Yeah. Well,
Sure.
we got to move on. We don't want to spend 8 years talking about Montrezl Harrell.
On the bigs.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Patrick?
I've talked a little bit. Patrick, you want to hop in?
Yeah, I mean, just basically the Jaden McDaniels, Dennis Schroeder swap with another pick and Danny Green. I think the Lakers. I'm not sure that the Lakers won that trade per se, but I think they definitely upgraded at the positions that they needed to. I would argue that the Lakers have one of the strongest offseason, not rebuild, but signees and trades of any other team in the league, I would say. Just because they basically kind of restructured their entire starting five besides LeBron and AD. And they've kind of built a nice core with Schroeder and Montrez, most likely coming off the bench during the regular season or not in the playoffs. But that'll give LeBron and AD some time to rest while the reigning sixth man of the year and Dennis Schroeder kind of control the floor.
Schroeder probably should have won sixth man of the year.
I think Schroeder should have won it. And I think Schroeder might actually end up starting. I know people like LeBron at point guard, but Schroeder played in the offense last year. There were 3 point guards on the floor at the time, basically. So it's not like you've got a cap on the amount of.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I think this division will be one of the most interesting divisions in all of basketball just because you have the Lakers, Clippers, Suns, Kings, and the Warriors.
It's really just the Western Conference. If you think, I think Dennis Schroeder's a great ad. You can't mess up with somebody like him. I mean, I legitimately think he should have won, especially with this. I mean, I know awards, you can't think about the playoffs, but he really was a big reason that Thunder were able to compete with the Rockets. So Schroeder's going to add a lot to that team, especially Rondo's a significant loss in my opinion. So
I have down for that.
Yeah, Rondo's a big loss. Just he adds a lot of playoff success. He adds a lot of veteran knowledge, and he can get it done. His assists, he had a couple runs where he was shooting well in the playoffs last season. I remember watching him hit 3 in a half. He was good. So Dennis is a step above Rondo in my opinion. So I'm excited to see that. I mean, the Lakers just won the finals and they got better. I think they're going back to back.
And they just re-signed Markieff Morris, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
That's a good signing too. That adds that physicality aspect that they kind of had last year. I know he didn't get a lot of playing time, but it's good when your team kind of has an edge to it. That was something I was kind of concerned about going into last season, but Dwight Howard I thought really helped kind of provide that kind of Birdman type role.
You also can't forget about Kyle Kuzma.
Kuzma was a great asset off the bench too. But that's the thing. This Lakers team got so deep that we're not even talking about a potential young starter essentially.
Right. Yeah. That's why.
Star or stud. A potential young starter.
It is Kyle Kuzma we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Well, he showed flashes a couple years ago. I personally don't think he's that good, but he's also coming off the bench on a championship team, and he could have started potentially. Yeah. And I don't know if they still would have.
The biggest part about Kuzma for me is just he has so much confidence in himself. That's a big part to why he's so good. I'm going to make a video soon about confidence in sports in general. We just saw it with Taysom Hill, people like that. It legitimately gives you an edge competitively. It is true. I completely believe that. So,
I agree with that 100%. But I guess we kind of covered everything with the Lakers. If there's one signing,
Patrick, do you have anything else to add?
No, it's not anything bad, anything like that. But the Lakers did go into the offseason with only 7 men on their roster, and I think they've done a brilliant job of expanding that to now I think it's 13 or 14. So a nice, solid two squadron rotation that they've built together. So I think they've done a really good job.
Yeah, they did. They definitely probably won the offseason, in my opinion. But yeah, we can go ahead and move on to across the pond, if you'd like to say it like that, even though it's the same city. But we'll go ahead and move on to the Clippers, who also had somewhat of a interesting offseason. They didn't really do much except for replace people. So, I mean, if you guys have anything really to add, I mean, I don't think they did much at all. I mean, people are being like, oh, they have something up their sleeve. What's going to happen? I don't really think they do, to be honest. I think that's a smokescreen.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. But I'd like to point out with their 33rd pick in the draft, they drafted Daniel Otutu from Minnesota, and he's a stretch 5, 6'10" center. So I really liked his gameplay, watching his highlights and kind of his videos and all that stuff. And I think he could actually be a pretty nice either a bench player or do really well in the G League enough to where they move him up to their, 14 minutes or 13
minutes. 33rd pick, but I mean 6'10", like
I know, but
5 in the it's good.
Yeah, I mean he really impressed me after watching some videos. So because they don't really have that many backup bigs like they have Zubac and Marcus Morris, and after that they don't have anyone.
They got Ibaka.
Oh, that's right. No,
I would argue that the Clippers actually have pretty good big.
Yeah, I might have typed this before.
Yeah, Zubac's actually a good guy to name because I think he did pretty well. He was definitely their standout guy last year at the center position, other than Montrez. But when Montrez was hurt to start the bubble and everything, like he played well. He filled that role pretty easily. So.
And yeah, Montrez actually, he wasn't like hurt. He had like those issues with his.
He's out. I'm just saying he's set.
No, he was out. You're right. I would say Zubac is definitely good defensively. And honestly, offensively too. I think that's why I think it was so important for them to get rid of Harrell almost. Really fast, I just kind of want to talk about this sort of team chemistry to a degree. I don't know necessarily if you call it chemistry, but like the lack of it. This team is filled with a ton of players that isolate the ball, and that included Montrez. I felt like he was kind of a black hole. He wasn't really creating opportunities for other people. And I realized that Serge obviously isn't, known for his passing, but when you have a guy like Serge who's always going to make the smart play, take the open shot, that adds a lot rather than drive and try and get your head down to the basket. But the thing with the Clippers, the reason I think they lost potentially last year is the Nuggets had a lot of very good individual defenders. And when you have a team that has good individual defenders against a team that plays a lot of isolation, the team with the good defenders is typically going to win. Isolation, I would say, is definitely one of Kawhi's strengths, as well as Paul George. But a team's going to be a lot better when you're moving the ball well. And that was something the Clippers really, really lacked. I was really hoping that they would get Rondo, especially this offseason. But that was an area that I definitely think that they lack in. I think adding Serge and Luke Kennard might help that a little bit. I know Kennard was with the Pistons. They didn't really have a main playmaker, but Kennard did kind of contribute to their passing a little bit. But I think if they can get some more off-ball movements, cutting, and rely a little bit more on getting open shots rather than contested isolation shots, they might have a shot at the finals. Like this is not a team that's bad. They're up 3-1 against the Nuggets. It's not like they should have lost that series. But they wanted to finish them off in isolation, and that's why they lost. Serge Ibaka obviously had great three-point shooting where they lacked it earlier. I think he might play a little bit of the 4, but he's also a great 5. JaMychal Green's the same way. I think he's a pretty good stretch 4. I mean, the Clippers have potential here. Like, I would say that if they can pull a big trade kind of mid-season and get a point guard, like, they should do that. I don't think Patrick Beverley is a passer. What?
Who did you say that would run the 4?
I think potentially Serge.
And okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I think Serge would run the 4 or 5.
I mean, who else? I think Zubac is good, but
Zubac is a good 5. But I think they can both start. I don't think that necessarily.
I don't know if Serge can run 4. I just don't think he's fast.
I think he can potentially. That's what he used to run.
Toronto.
He used to run the 4 a little bit, but I would say
he's a bit older. I don't know. I don't think Serge will run the 4 too well. Maybe not playoff time.
I think paying Markieff Morris, he'll probably run the 5. But I think Serge and Kennard were smart pickups in that they can kind of pass the ball a little bit and they're less selfish players. But guys like Marcus Morris, Kawhi, and Paul George are not good passers. They don't create for others. And that's really where I think the Clippers struggle.
Yeah,
Right.
I think the Clippers are actually the losers of this free agency offseason
Wow.
period.
I think they upgraded at the Montrez position. Yes, sir.
I do not think that they did very well. If they wanted to improve, like in my mind, I think they would have to either go after Glenn Robinson III or Rondae Hollis Jefferson. Both two players, not very star-studded or very good at all, but I think they really need some good passers and some good wing depth. So we talked about this a little bit before. JaMychal Green opted out his player option to go sign for $2.5 million more for the Nuggets. So I think that was pretty big for the Clippers. So yeah, and I also Joakim Noah for some reason is still on the Clippers roster. So
It's true. That's true. He'll be gone. He'll be in the Bulls. He'll have a farewell tour.
And so is Justin Patton, two players that should not ever see the floor ever.
Yeah, well, one thing I agree with completely is they need a little bit more wing depth. I also think they lost Landry Shamet, and he had the potential, and he honestly is a pretty good player now. He gives a lot of shooting, and although they have Kawhi and Paul George, if Paul George can't get it done like he has been recently, they're going to need more shooting than they have. So with that being said, I don't know if they were the losers, but they definitely didn't upgrade at the playmaking position, and they lost some depth. So I can see what you mean. They definitely didn't win this free agency, but I think they kind of they replaced some guys that they lost, and at the end of the day, that's just kind of how the cards fell.
Right, and also one more thing. There's a lot of trade rumors for Lou Williams right now,
Ooh.
so
I didn't
maybe
know
if
about
the
that.
Clippers can pull off a big trade, maybe they can upgrade a little bit more of their bench. So
Yeah,
we'll see about that.
I would say if they trade Lou Williams, they got to get a good passer. They
They have to. If they get rid of Lou,
they've got to get a point guard that can distribute the ball well. I mean, even Lou Williams is an incredible isolation scorer, but all he does is score in isolation. They really need assist guys, and if they can get that in a point guard, that would be massive.
yeah, for
So,
sure.
If let's say we're picking Lakers Clippers as of now after free agency, they've made their signings. What do you think happens here? I would say for sure I've got the Lakers.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear Lakers.
I honestly think that the Lakers, to a degree, are going to have a little bit of trouble, I would say, with the Clippers, with having Serge and Kennard, just because you can stretch the floor. That opens up more driving lanes for Paul George and Kawhi, which obviously that's neither of their forte, of course, but they're good drivers, and anytime you can spread the floor, that's going to help.
Yeah, well,
So,
go ahead, Patrick.
Okay, so I don't know how many times they're going to play with the semi-shortened season and whatnot, but I definitely think if they play an even number of games, I think they either split, but if it's odd, it goes to the Lakers.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, one thing I have to add just real fast is, so, like, I totally forgot what I was going to say.
Been there, done that.
I totally forgot. Oh, my God. Go ahead and keep talking. Let me remember this.
So I think this matchup will be pretty interesting, especially with, both two contenders. People should have thought the Clippers should have made it to the finals last year. I definitely was on that boat for a while. So it all comes down to whether or not Paul George plays well.
Yeah,
Paul George is going to be better, right?
Well, yeah, that. I remember what I was going to say. What I was going to say is when you have a guy like Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and they perform as mediocrely as they did in the playoffs, you really can't not exceed expectations. Right now, everybody has the lowest expectations for these two superstars that you really can have. So no matter what, in my opinion, like, they're going to exceed expectations. And at the end of the day, they're going to be seen as another contender. I really think they are. Kawhi is Kawhi, top 5 player in the league, top 3 possibly. If he just gives the effort, he can carry this team to the playoffs by himself if he gets a playmaker.
And I would say the Clippers have to exceed expectations, or else they gave up their entire future to get.
I really think they will. I don't think it's a question, honestly. Like, that everything's so low. People think like Tyler Hero is better than Paul George. I've seen people saying stuff like that, and I'm like, dude, like, yes, Tyler Hero had a good playoffs. Paul George didn't, but like, come on. Paul George was a MVP candidate 2 years ago. He's not completely garbage now, just because he had a pretty bad performance in the playoffs. So I think that's definitely something to watch out, but I would give the Lakers the edge for sure.
Agreed.
Well, it's been a solid pod.
All right.
Last words, or are we just wrapping up?
I'm ready to wrap this baby up.
I think we all had Lakers. I will say, don't sleep on the Clippers. As Archer was saying, people are sleeping, and that's when they're going to be at their peak. No one was pushing Toronto as champions when Kawhi joined there, so you never know what can happen.
Very true.
All
right. Well, if that's going to be it for the episode, please subscribe and like if you enjoyed, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.
Bye.